tonight, it's a JavaScriptLA. We're going to go through the Canvas clock guide on CanJS.com. We're going to learn some basics of CanJS and kind of building stuff with components and some basics of the clock API, or not the clock API, the Canvas API, and learn how to do some simple drawing. And in that, there's going to be a little bit of math, but we'll be able to power through it. All right, let me go ahead and share my screen. And cool. So to start off with, so I said my name is Chasen. We were talking a little bit before. I've been developing for a little over a decade. I currently work for Bitovi. We help people build amazing applications. We focus on web, but do the whole array. And a lot of what we do is build open source software and publish that to the world. We've been doing this for the entire decade that we've been around. We're going to be talking about CanJS today, which comes from JavaScript MVC, which had some other name before that, all the way back to like late 2007, early 2008. So open source is our passion. We love publishing open source software. We love helping people get involved and contribute and use projects. So what we're going to build today is these clocks. I guess we've got three technically. So this one's the really simple one. That's just the date object showing the current time. Then we've got this digital clock, and we'll see under the hood this is a CanJS component that's rendering the time. And then we've got this clock that's drawn with Canvas, which is another CanJS component, but it's all just regular Canvas JavaScript to be able to draw the circle, draw the second hand as it ticks around. Same thing with minute and hour hand. You guys get the picture. So let's talk a little bit about CanJS. How many people have heard of CanJS before coming to this meetup? Got one. Awesome. Really excited to show you guys like what CanJS is and kind of go through the basics. So first off, it's a client-side JavaScript framework. It starts off really simple, right? I think there's kind of three main concepts to think about when building a CanJS application. The first is that we push components. How many people have built applications kind of with a component architecture or heard of custom elements or that sort of thing? Yeah, cool. So definitely within our industry, it's become best practice to build small testable components that you can reuse within your application. So CanJS is built on this idea. The main API that you have to care about is CanComponent. And there's three parts to it. One, you give it a custom element tag. So when you put, in this case, my counter into your HTML, then it can render this component. Then what is it going to render? Well, the view. So here, we just have the template literal to have multi-line JavaScript. And this is going to, if you've used handlebars or mustache or that sort of thing, this is going to look a little bit familiar to you. So curly braces and then the name of a property or kind of the name of a variable in your template. And then there's interactive bits you can do too. So this is listening for just a regular JavaScript click event, and then it's going to call this method when the button is clicked. So where do these come from? And that's the last bit of CanJS is the view model. So we've got our view, we've got our what we call a stash template, that's the language. And then the view model is kind of the model that's backing the view. So in our case, we're saying our view model is going to have a count property, and the default value is going to start off at 0. And it's going to have an increment method that all that's going to do is increment the count for the component's view model. And that's it for this component. So we could even look under the hood. It's just rendering this my counter. Is that large? Let me bump that up a little bit. So it's just rendering the my counter custom element, and then inside it can render the count and the button that's defined in our view. That's the same thing that we're seeing here: count with the span and then a button around it. So those are the main concepts of CanJS. You build components that have a stash template that are backed by a view model that have all of the properties and methods that you need. And then everything else is just more components building on top of each other. Any questions or comments about this stuff before we move on? No, cool. We'll be doing a lot of this today, of like creating a component, figuring out what our view is, what properties we want in the view model, and then to have it rendered. I guess the last thing I should have mentioned that just seems so natural to me, but I remember that it's not. So here, we don't have any logic for how we're going to update the DOM. There's no manipulation of like creating a text node and then a span element and then appending this child. There's no calling like add event listener to set up the click listener, or if the component were removed from the page, making sure we call remove event listener. When we increment the count here in the view model, there's no logic to have the count be updated in the DOM. That is all abstracted away from you. And it's just handled by CanJS. So you don't have to spend time writing the glue code of the DOM manipulation to display what you want. You can just let CanJS's observable system update things automatically. So if a value changes, it'll change everywhere. If that value is used in a template or somewhere else in the view model or that sort of thing. Cool. Any questions or comments before we move on? Yeah.
So, like, what are like some specific use cases that you would use this just to make something simple?
So this is a super simple example, and the Canvas clock that we're going to be building is another kind of simple example. But it starts from the simplicity and builds up to whatever you need in your application. So we started working on CanJS and JavaScript MVC well before React or Angular, Vue, and now they all kind of cover a similar use case of building rich user interfaces without having to do the DOM manipulation on your own. Cool. Any other questions or comments before we move on? Awesome. So if you haven't already, on your laptop, go to canjs.com and click on the guides link that's in the sidebar on the left. And under there, under recipes, there's going to be the Canvas clock link, and that's the guide that we're going to kind of walk through together today. Raise your hand when you've got that open on your laptop. Cool. Okay, so the format of what we're going to do is we're going to let me scroll past this a little bit. For each step, let me bump this up a little bit. Maybe not that much. So for each step, we're going to talk about the problem of the next thing that we want to do and what we're trying to accomplish. And this is going to be broken up into smaller steps. So we're only tackling a little thing at a time. So we're going to talk about what we want to do and what we need to know in order to do it. So we're going to talk about those CanJS fundamentals. We're going to talk about the Canvas fundamentals of the drawing API and that sort of thing. And we'll talk about all of the information that you kind of need to know. And where it's required, we'll also talk about like what we need to do. How do you know you have the right answer? And for each of these, I want to take a few minutes for us to try and complete it on our own, and then we'll talk about a solution together. And one thing that I really like about our guides is for each step, when you get down, I'm going to cheat and just look at a solution real quick. When you get down to a solution, so it has like all of the highlighted code that you'll need to add to yours, and in the upper right, there's always a copy button that you'll be able to take the entire code and get up to where you need to be. So you can mess around with coming up with a solution on your own, and then when we go through it together, you'll be able to copy and paste the same code so we're all on the same page. So let's get started. So we talked a little bit about, okay, this is the clock that we're going to build. We're going to create components for each part of this. And this entire application, even though the very root of our application is going to be a component, like everything's a component. And we'll render this just with the DOM, and then we'll render the analog clock with Canvas. So if you're on the guide page, scroll down to the setup section, or in the black bar, there's also the nav there, and you can go to setup and click on the bold JS bin button that's at the top left corner the JS bin. That'll open it in a new window. And then what you can do is go to File and click Clone, and then you'll have your own copy of the code. And could you raise your hand when you've done that? Cool. So let's go through like what's in the code to start off with. I'm gonna close each of these just to be able to focus. So our HTML is real simple. We're bringing in CanJS through a script tag. Normally you would bring it in with npm or something like that. For using like a JS bin, just the script tag is handy. And then we have a clock controls custom element, which we'll look at the JavaScript for that. So we saw on the homepage that can component example. This is very similar, where we have clock controls defined as our custom elements tag name. I'm going to look at the view first. We have a view which is a paragraph with the time, and then we want a digital clock component. We're going to build that. We want an analog clock component, which is going to be the canvas one. We're going to build that. And this syntax here is passing time into those components. So digital clock is going to have a property on its view model called time. We're going to, instead of like each of them having their own time that they have to keep track of, we're just going to give them the time. And same thing for analog clock. So the last bit is the view model. So here we're defining all of the properties that we need for our stash template. So there's a time property, and its value is going to be the logic that's in here. So what we do is every second we want 1 second to pass and to update our time. So we have a set interval, which changes the time property to be a new date, and we start off with the current time, and that's what the resolve is giving it a value. And then what we return is whatever cleanup is required. So in our example, we're never removing the clock controls element from the DOM. It's always going to be there. But in an actual application where you show a component and then you stop showing a component, then you might want to do some cleanup after yourself. So that's what the clear interval is doing. Any questions about this? Cool. Okay, so we have our setup. We've already, okay, so we talked about all of this. And there's nothing for us to do in the setup phase other than like click the JS bin and clone it. Okay, so the first thing that we're actually going to build is the digital clock component. So this is the one with, it's just showing numbers, nothing related to Canvas. So we want to create a digital clock custom element. We want to pass the time from clock controls to the digital clock. That's already kind of done for you in the JS bin. And then in our digital clock, we want to write out the hours, minutes, and seconds. So this we've already talked about. So to create a digital clock component, we'll want to use can component, like the clock controls that we already have. We'll want to give it a tag. The view should be something like this to write out the time. And then our view model is going to have all of the properties we need to display stuff in the view. What this is saying is under the hood, the way that you define a view model, what the object looks like, is defined by a package called CanDefineMap. And basically, the gist of it is when you have a property, you can either give it an object to describe it, like we had the value earlier, or you can just give it a type. So here we can say, okay, this property should just be a new instance of this type. We can also have methods on the view model that we can call within the stash template to be able to render some content. So we can have logic in here, and then in the view part, or in the stash template part, we can call that method from the view model, just like you would call a function. You can call that method, and it'll just print out in the page, whatever value you're returning here. Then the last bit, this is just some JavaScript. And you can click on these links to see the docs on MDN for stuff. So you can create a new date, and it has get seconds, get minutes, get hours. And then you can use string.padStart or string.pad start to change a string and pad it out with however many zeros. So what we want to do is create a digital clock component. We want to have time passed to it, and then in our view, we want to render the hours, the minutes, and the seconds. Any questions before you guys hack a little bit to try and come up with a solution? Okay, cool. I'm going to give you guys a couple of minutes, and you can just modify the code that's in the JS bin, and you can also see. Oh, I don't know why. If, like me, there's nothing in the output in JS bin, go ahead and refresh the page, and JS bin is just not behaving. Is anyone else having the same issue where there's nothing in the output? Everyone sees something? Okay, we need to figure out what's going on. There should not be anything unsafe. Well, I'm glad it's working for you. I'm going to spend these couple minutes trying to figure out what I did wrong. Okay, so Chrome is not behaving for me. But everyone should be starting off with this, where they see the date being rendered, and then just an empty box. And then you want to figure out creating a new can component that, let me put up the requirements again. We want a digital clock custom element that takes the time and then shows a HHMMSS. And if you have questions, you can ask me. And then we'll go through the solution together.
Yeah, no, 5 spot.
Anyone feel like they're starting to come to a solution? It's okay if no, we'll be going through it together. All right, let's go through the solution together, and we'll talk about each of the parts. I think it would be super boring if I like typed all of this out live, just be a waste of time. So I'm just gonna copy paste, and then we'll talk about it. Okay, so so similar to how we had clock controls defined, we're gonna have another can component extend, which is creating a new type of component. We gave it the tag digital clock, and here for the view, what we need to keep rendering this time is we want to show whatever the current hour is, and then the current minute and current second. So what this is going to do is call those HHMMSS methods in the view model to display. And as long as those are returning new values, it'll be able to just update the DOM continuously. So the property that we're going to define is time. We're going to take time in from the clock controls component. So if we go back to, that does not scroll. Okay, if we go back to the clock controls view, you'll notice that we were already passing in time to our digital clock component. So we just need to say, okay, the time property, it's going to be a date. Then we have our HHMM and SS methods. And these are just taking the time that's passed into us. So this in here will always refer to whatever is in the view model. So like a new instance of the view model is created, and then that is what this is. So we have the time, and we're going to take it by. Sorry, we're gonna have someone correct me. Yes, thank you. Module by 12, and then if it's 0, then we know we're at 12. Otherwise, we're just going to show the hour that we're at, because this get hours I think returns will return 0 for 12. The minutes, we're going to get the minutes, convert it to a string, and then pad it out. We could have done the same thing with the hours. Maybe we should have. Go either way on that. So get the minutes, turn it into a string, and then pad it out to the zeros, and then same thing with the seconds. So this time let's go back to clock controls. So remember that every second this interval is firing, and it's going to create a new date which has the current time. That's always going to be passed into digital clock. So it's observing that time property, and whenever it has a new value, it's going to rerun these methods and then update the view. So that's how, there's no logic in here for calling these calling these every second or anything like that. Just as the time property changes, then these methods are going to be rerun. CanJS is smart about that, where this example is simple because we only have one property. So when time changes, all of them are going to be rerun. But it only reruns what changes inside of the function or the method that you define. So if this was using another property in the view model, but these weren't, and that property changed, then it would only be rerunning this and then only updating that part of the DOM. So that's a little of the magic behind the scenes. Any questions about this? Yeah.
Is it re-rendering the hours and the minutes each time?
So
or just the seconds until such time as those other two pieces of data change?
yeah, it only needs to update the thing that was changed. So,
But is the time considered all of those, the hours, the minutes, and the seconds, or just?
yeah, so I see what you're saying. So in our case, it is re-rendering all of them because it's observing when time changes. So it'll rerun all of these functions whenever time changes. And then, you know, a lot of the time, in a minute, the only value that's actually going to be changing is the seconds. So these don't need to be touched, but this one does have to be updated. Any other questions before we move on? Cool. Okay, so our digital clock done. We don't need to do anything with it. It's displaying the time perfectly. Now we're going to focus on the canvas portions. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to create an analog clock custom element or component. And then inside of it, we're going to create a canvas element. And then we want to draw one circle. That's going to be, you know, the frame of our clock. So what do we need to know? Well, we've already gone through the can component stuff. You're going to do the same thing where you define a tag. It's going to be analog clock. And you can define a view and a view model. And then in our view, what we're going to want is just the canvas element. That's all that this component is going to display is the canvas element. So we'll want to have the canvas element. We'll have a view model. And then here we're learning something a little bit new about view models. So we've talked about being able to define our own properties and methods. And there's a couple of special ones that if you define them on a view model, you can get or set some special information. So we're going to talk about connected callback, which is called when a new view model is instantiated for the component. And the component, again, it's taking care of actually creating the DOM elements. So when both have been instantiated, it can pass the elements into the view model, and then you can do stuff to modify the element that you have. So in this case, in this simple example, our view is just this h1, and our custom element is my element. So the thing that's going to be passed in is the my element, and inside of it is going to be the h1 with first child. So we get the element, and then it's just it's a DOM node. So we can query it however we want. We can modify it however we want. We can do whatever we want in the connected callback. In our case, that's going to be important because we're going to want to get the canvas element, and then we're going to need to do the drawing. So to get what's called the rendering context, to be able to draw inside of the canvas element, we can get a reference to the elements and then call get context. And this is in 2D. No 3D clocks tonight. Keep it basic, two dimensions. So that's how we can get the context. And then once we have a context, we can do all sorts of drawing. And how the Canvas API works is basically you're going to set properties on the Canvas context and say, okay, I want my line width to be 4. I want my stroke style to be this color. I want all of these properties, and then you can draw, right? So once you've set up the properties you want for the thing that you're drawing, then you can actually do the drawing. And there's a bunch of different methods for doing different drawings. First, for us to be able to draw a circle, we're going to need to call begin path to let Canvas know, okay, we're about to draw a path. Then we're going to, it has an arc method for us to be able to draw a circle. And then we have to close that. And then stroke is what actually, you've got the path, and then you need to actually apply a stroke to it. So that's another method call. And that's, I think, all we need to know straight off the bat for creating the canvas element for being able to get a reference to the drawing context, to set properties here, set properties of how we want to draw, and then to actually draw the circle and give it a stroke. And then that's it for that's it for this. And these are some helpful things to know. So taking back to at what point in school do you learn? Is this like geometry stuff? When do you learn like diameter and radius and stuff? So quick refresher. So you've got the circumference of a circle. You've got the diameter is the distance across the circle, and the radius is half the diameter. It's the distance from the center out to the circle. And in our examples, we're suggesting, okay, maybe you have a canvas that's 255 by 255. So you'll need to know things like where is the center of the circle and how far is the radius out to the end. So these are just some helpful numbers. Any questions before we try and hack on it on our own? Nope. Okay, cool. So we'll give everyone a few minutes. Again, we want to create a analog clock custom element. We want to create the canvas. We want to have its view be the canvas element, and then we want to do some drawing on the canvas that we create. If you have any questions while you're hacking, feel free to raise your hand and I'll come over. Anyone feel like they're kind of sort of at an answer? A little bit. All right. Let's go through it together. Okay, so we want to create another component, and then we want to have a new canvas element, and then we want to use that to do our drawing. So let me copy this. Okay, so let's go through this code. Okay, so we're creating a new component. We've done this already. Created a new component with the tag. This time, our view is just going to be the canvas element. So there'll be an analog clock, a custom element that has the canvas inside of it, and then we're going to use that new connected callback method that we learned about, and that gets us a reference to our custom element. All right. So what we want is its first child is this canvas element, and then we need to get the drawing context so that we can draw inside of it. So that gives us our canvas. Then we have a few handy properties for being able to calculate stuff. So we set our height and width to 255, so that's our entire diameter. Then our radius is going to be half that, and then this is a little adjustment to give us some room. And then the center, the dead center, is going to be exactly half of the diameter. Then we can start changing some things on our canvas context. So here we're going to set our line width and stroke, and then we're going to go through the actual drawing methods. So we start a path, we call an arc, which, I mean, we could look at the docs on MDN for what arc is, but essentially what we're doing is we're starting at a center, and then we want to say how wide we want it to be, and then we do the math for from a starting position all the way around. We want to draw our arc. So starting from 0 and then going all the way around the circumference of the circle. So that's the arc, and then we have to end the path and then actually draw it, because at this point we've drawn a path, but we haven't actually drawn anything to the screen. And that's when we call stroke. And that gives us just this circle that's taking up the full width. I should point out, so when we subtracted the radius, the reason for that is that because our line width was 4, so we wanted our arc to actually be fully visible inside of the canvas context, which is why we shortened that radius just a little bit, so we had enough room to draw the full 4-pixel width.
These methods are canvas, are part of the canvas object.
Yeah. So as soon as we get so we have the canvas elements, and then as soon as we call get context, that is the object. That canvas context is the thing that we can do all of our drawing operations. So it's all in the canvas API that we're we're defining the stroke style and line width and doing all of the drawing operations. Cool. Any other questions? Awesome. So the next thing that we're going to do is draw the second hand. So what we want is we want a line coming out from the center of our clock, and it's going to every second it's going to change position. Now, a little secret about the Canvas API: there's no we're drawing things, but you'll notice we're not dealing with any objects. It's not an object-oriented API really, where we're creating the arc path object and we can modify it or that sort of thing. It's just for drawing. So we're going to, instead of actually moving a second hand around the clock, what we're actually going to do is just wipe out the entire thing and redraw from scratch, which is fine. We're doing it once a second. We don't really have to worry about only drawing the clearing the very minimum that we need to for our application. So we can just wipe the whole thing and then redraw the clock. Okay, so we're going to draw the second hand needle whenever the time changes, and then we're saying that we want it to be 2 pixels wide. It's going to be red, and then it's going to be just short of the full radius of the clock, so it's going to be 85%. So what do we need to know? So we talked about connected callback. That happens when the view model and the elements are and the custom element are both instantiated, and then we can start doing stuff with the elements inside. There's also a method called listen to that a view model has, where we can say, okay, I want to subscribe to the changes in a property in the view model. Now, in most applications, this sort of thing isn't required because where are those properties being displayed? In our view in the DOM. So we just have the curly braces, and then we can display that value in the DOM. We don't have to worry about listening to things and what have you. But in our case, when we're drawing our clock, we need to know when the time changes so that we can clear the context and then redraw the clock.
Hi, is this a JavaScriptLA?
Yeah.
We couldn't find it. Really wanted it.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, please join us. And let me grab another table.
Oh, thank you.
I don't know. I'll give up my table. Oh, we definitely can. Okay, we definitely can. Okay.
We can just grab the other table from the back.
Yeah, let's take that one.
Sorry about that. It took most of our time out.
I am so sorry that it was that
It's
difficult to
okay.
find.
We were in the front and no one was around, so we were like, is anyone? Or someone listening? Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
Oh, that's okay. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course. Oh, we should flip that. Right?
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah.
You're gonna read the line.
Feel free to grab all our pizza stuff too. Yep. Okay, so we can call this listen to find out when the time changes, and then this function will be called whenever the time property changes in our view model. And it's given two things. There's an event, which is the change event, and then the new time value. So this is going to be our new date. So that's how within connected callback we can listen to when the time changes. And then this little bit, this gets a little bit complicated to try and explain kind of the math behind drawing the seconds. I'm actually thinking that we might do this one together and talk about the solution, because I feel like I'm lacking as a teacher to properly explain the math, to talk about, okay, how you calculate the in an abstract way, how you calculate the angle and then use cosine and sine to get the correct stuff. I think this one, instead of stopping and trying to accomplish it separately, we're going to do this one together. The short of it, though, is that we're going to define a function that's going to take in the number of seconds, and that's how we're going to be able to determine of the circumference of the entire circumference at what angle is the second hand going to be at. So everyone, cheat with me. Just copy the solution, paste it into your code, and then we'll talk through the changes. So first we have this base 60 to radians function that we just mentioned. This in our, you can expand these to see. So in our connected callback method, we're still going to have the circle that we need to draw, and then every second, what we need to do is we need to clear the entire canvas rect, or the entire context. We're duplicating our code at this point. We're copy pasting our circle drawing, and we're putting it in here too, because we need to, we'll need to redraw the circle if we clear everything out. Now we're going to do a little shortcut. So instead of doing canvas.lineWidth, canvas.strokestyle, canvas.line cap, and assigning all of those, we can just assign the values from this object to the canvas context. So that's a little short. And then now we can get into the exciting math of how the second hand is drawn. So the first thing that we do is we get the number of seconds from the clock, and then we're getting real accurate and also getting the number of milliseconds too. The size is going to be not quite the radius, but 85%. And then our x and y in the entire coordinate system is going to be whatever the center is, and then we're going to do the adjustments from there. So here, we're passing in the seconds, and this is the math part where I don't feel as proficient to be able to like explain and teach. But we're going to take the number of seconds, and then we're going to be able to get the angle of the second hand. So for the x coordinates, we're using the sine function, and we're essentially saying whatever that angle is times the length that we want, and that's going to get us from the center to some point outside of to some point in the circle that's 85% of the radius away from our center. So that's how we get our x, and then our y is similar, where this time we're using our same helper function, but we're using cosine to get the y position. And then we can do similar drawing that we've done before, where we start a path. Basically, you can think of the canvas drawing as like you have like wherever you currently are. So you need to like move the tool around, and then you can draw paths and that sort of thing. So we move to the center, and from the center, that's when we draw the line to wherever the second hand should end. We finish the path. We still haven't drawn anything on screen. We just have a path, and then we call stroke, and it applies whatever properties are currently set on canvas to draw the path. That was a lot. What I kind of want to focus on is if there's any questions about that general concept of how we're listening for the time to change and how we're overall redrawing the clock. Any questions or comments? Yeah.
So is it redrawing the whole clock with each second, or just the second hand?
Yeah, because otherwise we would, if we wanted to avoid that, we'd need to keep track of where we've drawn and then just clear the bits of where we've drawn to be able to redraw just the things that have changed, which you can definitely do, but I feel like it would be even more complex for this. But in like games and things, you're typically like just redrawing the parts that you need to. But because you can think of Canvas as just a like blank canvas, and we're creating these paths and we're drawing these things on it, and the only thing, there's no layers. The only thing that we can do to redraw a certain point or erase what we've done is to clear out the entire section on the canvas. Cool. Any other questions? Yeah.
It's not so specific to the two hands here, but how do we know which are CanJS functions and which, in this case, are Canvas API methods? And it's difficult to differentiate, at least for me.
Yeah. So for what we're doing here, we're kind of using CanJS for just giving us our, at least for this component, we're just using CanJS to be able to know when the time changes with the listen to be able to have it do the creation of the canvas elements, and then we listen for connected callback to get that. And then everything else is using the Canvas API for the actual drawing. And in earlier, this is a little bit confusing because in earlier cases and in a lot of applications, what you're just doing is displaying values in the DOM and having buttons and paragraphs of text or whatever. So like our digital clock wasn't using any of the like Canvas API, and we were relying on CanJS's CanStash to be able to like display values in the DOM. So a lot of times this is how, with templates, is how you're actually building applications. And it's, or I think it's cool that CanJS gives you let's go back to this. CanJS gives you the tools to be able to still do the DOM stuff really easily and get what you need to do any custom things like, using Canvas to draw an entire clock, or if you were building, anything else where you need access to just the DOM elements. Maybe you're building a video player and audio player, and you need access to be able to set up your own listeners for seeking or whatever, you can get access to that. Any other questions or comments? Cool. And in the back, did he show you the getting to the guide and stuff like that? Okay, cool. And you guys got the JS bin set up and all that jazz? Sweet. Okay. So if we kept going how we were, we already duplicated the code for like drawing the circle and had that happen again in our listen to method. And we've drawn the second hand. We need to draw two more hands, the minute hand and the hour hand. And we could keep on duplicating code, but I think this is the time where we should refactor it a little bit and change it so we only have one thing that is drawing the clock, and we only have one thing that generically can draw a needle, and then we can pass it what we need to for like the color and the size and where the second hand should be, where the minute hand should be, where the hour hand should be. So what we're going to do is we're going to change our code so we clear the canvas before we draw the circle and the needle. So it's all going to be the same code that's doing that. And then we're going to rewrite the code that we have. And we want to have a draw needle method that can take how long of a needle we want, where it's going in the circle, and then any additional styles that need to be applied to it. So we want a draw needle function that takes those three things. So what do we need to know? Well, first off, we can get rid of the circle drawing that's happening inside of connected callback, but outside of the listen to. We can drop that completely because the listen to will always be called when the time changes, so we don't need that extra call. We can use this clear rect method to clear the entire canvas, and I think we're actually already doing that. Yeah, we're using clear rect inside of listen to right now, so we can continue using that. And then we want to create the draw needle function that takes those three things to do the drawing. So we'll take maybe 5 minutes, and at this point, you don't need to do the math for the hour and minute hands. We're just going to refactor the code that we have to make it so that we can reuse it a little bit more in future steps. Any questions before I give you a few minutes to complete stuff on your own? Cool. And please raise your hand if you have any questions, and I'm happy to help. Anyone feel like they're starting to come to a solution? Cool. We'll take a couple more minutes and then we'll go through it together.
Object dot assign only created in ES6.
I feel like it was, oh wow, even, I guess it was, yeah, IE doesn't support it, so it was a recent change. By recent, I mean
Right.
last few years, yeah. In the last like 4 or 5 years. Yeah, definitely not required for this, but I feel like it's so much nicer to have an object that you can just assign or copy the properties over to Canvas than assign those one by one, especially for how we're going to refactor this, not having to like get an object and then iterate through its keys and block. Cool. Let's start going through the solution together. Unlike the other ones, I want to actually code this one. I think refactoring is fun to talk about, which is hopefully the nerdiest thing I say today. Okay. Who wants to get me started with what we need to do? Our goal is to make sure we're clearing the canvas and refactor this so we don't have the duplicated like clock frame code, and we have a reusable function to be able to draw needles, to draw the hands. Who wants to get me started with the first change that we should make? Anyone? Okay, I'm gonna get started by deleting this, drawing the circle. So we only need to do that once, and that's gonna happen every time that the time changes. So we don't really need to draw it first when connected callback is first called. So I'm gonna delete that. What should our next step be for refactoring this code? Yeah.
Take the process that you created the second hand and turn it to the point that you can just refactor it for hour, minutes, hands.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. So what we're gonna want in this, what can we take? So the seconds, that's custom for the second hand, but and the size we're gonna need to pass that in too. But all of this code we can actually take and we can reuse it for all of the other hands that we need to draw. So I think in the what you need to know, it suggested kind of a method signature. So I'm going to take that. I'm going to put it in the connected callback because we don't need to redefine this helper function inside listen to every time. We can define it out here. And we'll still have a reference to the canvas context. So now, okay, we want to accept length, base 60 distance, and styles. So I'm going to copy this code, and then we'll change it to be just what we need to pass in. So draw needle, we want to pass in a length. So for the second hand, what's our length going to be? I think it's going to be our size. Yeah, it's going to be of the radius, like how long do we want our path to be? The base 60 distance. So I think what we want to use here is instead of having the seconds calculated, right, we're going to pass in seconds as our base 60 distance, and then we can reuse the same math for everything. So down here, we want, let's move seconds before then, and then we'll have seconds, and then what else do we need? So styles. So these styles, we're going to change between the different hands. So let's, can we delete all of this? I think so. And then for our styles, we're going to want what we're assigning to canvas here, and instead pass it in as an object. Get the indentation correct. Okay, so we're going to call draw needle with, oh, I got rid of size, and I didn't mean to. Where did size go? Oh. Okay. So now we have size, seconds, and we're passing those into draw needle. It is drawing correctly, which is great, but we haven't changed all of this code to be correct yet. So we're getting styles now, so we don't have to call, or we don't have to create that object. We're not creating the second hand. We're taking in the size now. We're going to accept that as length. Where does that go? That goes right here. We have access to our center. That's the same. Line to XY, that's all the same. Okay. Have I missed anything? Anyone see any issues with how we've refactored this?
I don't really understand what connected callback. It looks like just some of the specs for the canvas up there.
Up here?
Yeah, diameter, etc.
Yeah, so
Why are you calling it connected callback?
oh, so connected callback is a method that's provided by CanJS. So this gets back to like, what is CanJS, what is Canvas? So all of our like component extends, defining the tag view model, and then all of the like properties or methods on the view model, those are all related to CanJS. So it provides a connected callback method that will be called with the elements when both your view model and the element or and the custom element are instantiated. So this we could actually like these. Do they have to be in connected callback? They could actually just be out here. It's not using anything in here. But this canvas, we need it in here because we get the custom elements, and then we get the canvas element, and then we can get the the drawing context. Yeah.
Why was drawing a circle inside the circle?
So we'll need to, because we're clearing it every time, we'll need to redraw the circle. And the reason why we need to clear it every time is because we're not, yeah, otherwise we'd have to keep track of just the line that we drew before.
I forgot it's all one.
Yeah, it'd be easier to manipulate if we were dealing with a like second hand object that we could just like remove from the canvas or just like change its properties. But yeah, because it's all one 2D canvas, we got to clear stuff. Cool. Any other questions?
And you can do that because there's only a couple of things, those two hands. And if you have a really complicated, like drawing or something in a circle, it might take longer to re-render.
Yeah, so the Canvas API has been around for over a decade. It's very fast. Like you can build games that are using Canvas as the way it draws. I think today you would use WebGL or something like that, but Canvas has been around forever. So nothing that we're doing is going to max out what Canvas is capable of. So it's okay for us to just throw the entire context away and redraw. This would be performant on a phone that was 5 years old or whatever. It's a fast API, which is why like you'll see that it only gives you the primitives to be able to do like really basic drawing stuff. It's not low level, obviously, but it's low level enough where it's going to be fast. Cool. Any other questions?
So there's a lot of variables just defined as constants. Is that why is it a constant like seconds is size as opposed to why are those constants?
As opposed to like var or let.
Yeah.
So we're never modifying. We're never modifying the
those are constants.
These values. Yeah. Which is why like we could use let or var. It'd be perfectly fine. But in this code, it just kind of communicates like these variables are never going to change. X here, the size that we have here is not going to change.
We'll have X and Y above in the center. Those depend on.
Yeah, so this is derived from some of the variables that are passed into us in this function, which is why, yeah, if we wanted to, we could just define upfront like, we're going to have X and Y and whatever other properties, but it's okay to just define them in these functions as constants. Cool, good question. Anything else? All right. I think we're on the last thing that we want to do, which is draw the minute hand and the hour hand. So let's talk about that, what we're going to need for that. Okay, so yeah, we want to draw, this should say, I think this should be the hour hand. That's a mistake. So we want to draw a minute hand that's 3 pixels wide and then goes 65%. And then we want a hour hand, which is a little bit wider and then goes a little bit shorter. What do we need to know? It says we have everything. Do we have everything? We've got our reusable function for drawing needles. So really at this point, we can use that function. To draw a minute hand and a hour hand. We just need to change the styles that we're going to use to draw, and we need to change the length that it's going to display at. But everything else, now that we have the math out of the way in that reusable function, we can draw whatever we want to. We can draw whatever needles we want to. So let's take 5 minutes for this. If anyone has any questions while they're hacking, raise your hand and I'll come over. anyone have one of the needles or one of the hands drawn? Awesome. Cool. We'll go over a solution together in maybe a minute. All right, let's go through this together. So we want to draw a minute hand that's 3 pixels wide, dark gray, and a little bit shorter than the second hand, and then a fatter hour hand that's a little bit shorter. We're gonna write this one too. Okay, so draw a second hand. I'm gonna copy paste this to start off with. So let's draw the minute hand first. So we're gonna need our minutes, and this goes a little bit back to your question about the const. Well, we want a different size for this one. We could say let size here and then reassign the size down here. We might as well just inline these. These aren't actually reused anywhere. So I'm just gonna remove the size variables that we had before and just put those in the function call. Okay. So minute hands, we want minutes. So let's get minutes. And then, so not only do we want the minutes, but we don't just want the minute hand the needle to stay there while the rest of the seconds are going. And then it gets to 60 seconds and it jumps to where the, jumps to the next minute. It's nicer to have that be a fluid motion. So we want to, which is what time is doing up here, where it's getting the seconds and then a fraction of the current milliseconds. Which, when you think about it, doesn't actually matter. Our interval is running at every second, so it's kind of irrelevant that we're doing that. But we could increase the accuracy of our interval and then have that be even smoother. Let you try that at home. So for minutes, we want to get the minutes, and then we want the seconds, and we don't need to divide by 1,000. We just need to divide by 60. Because we're getting the fraction of of how many seconds, right? So it's the number of minutes plus a fraction of however many seconds of 60 that time's progressed. So we've got our minutes. Our radius, what did we say we wanted? 65%. So let's make this a little bit shorter. We're gonna draw our minutes instead. And okay, so we've got our minute hand drawn, but we want different styles. So we want it 3 pixels. We want it to be this dark gray, and line count round is fine. So actually, we could have refactored this a little bit differently before. This line cap, if we're just going to reuse it, what we could do instead is just assign it up here, and then we wouldn't also pass in line cap. I'm just going to keep it as is if we had wanted to change that. Okay, so we've got our minute hand, and I don't know if you can tell that it is ever so slightly moving as the seconds progress, right? You can see just the smallest amount of pixels shifting color as time progresses because we're incorporating the seconds too. Cool. Any questions about our minute hands? All right. Oh, yeah.
As a reminder on the seconds, what is time versus this time? Seconds.
This time get seconds?
Oh,
Or,
you're doing time by, yeah. What's time versus this time? What are they referencing?
that's a great point. I should here it didn't matter that it was this dot time. Time when the time observable changes, we're getting the new time. Inside of here, we also have a reference. This inside of the listen to is our view model. So it actually doesn't matter if we refer to the time that's passed in or the
It'll
demodel.
override to the time that's passed in, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Any other questions? All right. Let's draw our hour hand. Okay, so draw hour hand. We're going to need the hours, which is going to be we're going to get hours. Now this, I think this returns something that we're going to have to modify a little bit. So what does get hours return? Right now, is this 8? Okay. Oh, so I've got 20. Okay. So we should change that. We want, what we can do is we can say, what times 60 divided by 12, right? So times 5 plus the minutes divided by 60. I think that makes sense. So we've got our hours. This one's going to be a little bit shorter at 45. And did I copy the wrong one? Okay. And a little bit thicker of a line. Okay. So here we've got, okay, so we get the hours, which is 20. And then really this is multiplying it by 5 and then adding the minutes. So we're not going to be, if I zoom into this, we're not going to be able to see the hour hands make any any noticeable change. Maybe if we leave it for long enough, we might see the smallest shift in color value. Nobody got time for that. So so we've got our hours. We're drawing it at a different length and then a different style. And I think that's everything. Any questions about how we filled out that hours? Cool. That concludes going through the guide. If you scroll down to the very end, it'll have the same thing that we ended up with as the result. You can open up that JS bin and hack away on it too, or it'll be very close. We might have written the code slightly differently because we did it on our own, but it'll be very similar to what we wrote. Any questions about kind of overall how we used CanJS, why we used it, Canvas or the Canvas API, anything like that? Any higher level questions?
I just think in your tutorials, you could, if you colored the CanJS related methods, it would just be a little easier. I mean, you know them by heart, but
yeah, what we've talked about for a while is
or a link. I mean, if you really want to get fancy, where you can hover over it and that would take you to the doc of that particular CanJS method.
Yeah, we've talked about being fancy. I think it'd be helpful if like next to this line or something, it said, oh, you can look at the docs for Can component here, or tag or vmodel, and then you would just see like, oh, this line is kind of related to the library. I don't think we'd be able to mark up everything, like, although it would be really cool if we could mark up things like, oh, math.sin, we're gonna link to MDM.
Oh yeah, no, but I mean just your CanJS stuff.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments about stuff?
What's the adoption of CanJS? Is it like how popular is it?
Yeah, so it's definitely way less popular than React or Vue or Angular, that sort of thing. We have worked with, so the company that I work for, Bitovi, we've done consulting for a large number of companies over our 10+ year history. So a lot of the, I'd say a lot of the adoption of CanJS has been at larger companies, definitely smaller ones too, but I wish I could name a certain large company that doesn't talk about what frameworks they choose to use, but they use a lot of our stuff internally. And then I think I can talk about like stuff for Levi's and Lowe's and Sam's Club and other large companies that have used our stuff and continue to. So our community, our like popularity definitely isn't as large, but I think our overall like community isn't as large. But we make sure like I'm part of the core team for these projects, and we're always available on Gitter and our forums and GitHub and that sort of thing. So we just make ourselves very available to answer questions and help people. And one of the things that I love is like we host these hack nights every 5 or 6 weeks. And I actually would really like your feedback on if this one was like interesting and what you guys would be interested in learning about in the future, because we'll build these guides and then we'll go through them at our meetups, and we kind of custom build them for the meetups to be able to show people how to build stuff that they're interested in. So yeah. Cool. Any other questions or comments? Awesome. Well, we have the room for another 10 or 15 minutes. So I'll be around to talk to you guys. I'd be really interested in hearing more about what you guys do and what you're working on and stuff related to web development. For everyone who is watching on the live stream, thanks for watching. And we'll be back in another 5 or 6 weeks with another one of these. Thanks for watching.
Hey, I'm VJ. Thanks for coming to the meetup today. I'm the organizer for JavaScriptLA. I wanted to just personally thank you for watching this video. If you found it useful, I'd love for you to subscribe to our channel. We're slowly but surely making lots of little video content for you guys to enjoy and soak up, especially if you want to get better at programming. I'd love for you to be on our Slack channel too. Over 800 users. The link is right here, jsjoin, jsjo.in. If you forget, it's really simple. If you have questions for this meetup, or questions you didn't get to ask, or because you couldn't make it, we'd love to have you just post it in our Slack group. So if you're a newbie, don't worry. It's a good place to go. There's a lot of great engineers all connected around LA and Orange County. So I hope to see you there.